Hello, everyone. Whoa. Thank you all for coming today. I think it's important to get started. I know everybody is really busy. I'm Melissa Bull and I'm the Director of QUT Centre for Justice. But before I say anything more about that, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands where we meet. It's the Turrbal and Yugara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respects to their elders, laws, customs and creation spirits and recognise that these lands that were never ceded, have always been places of teaching, research and learning. QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander pay within QUT community, and I'd like to acknowledge our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who are with us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to this really important forum panel. I'm just looking for my notes. I had it here just so that I get things right. The reason I just want to say a little bit about why it matters to QUT Centre for Justice. Our vision is about the democratisation of justice, and that's about access to justice, how we think about justice, and the systems that reproduce justice, but probably more pertinently, injustice in this context. These systems and arrangements in our daily lives can reproduce knowledge and practices, and they can impact on people in negative ways. And these are the things that can sustain gender violence. So that's why this panel is so important, this talking to boys and young men about Andrew Tate and the Manosphere. I'm delighted that we have members from our centre involved. Michael Flood, who's an important member of our centre, is going to chair, and he, along with our panel, have incredible expertise. So I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say, and I'll hand it over to Michael to do the introductions and to get things underway.
Thank you. So we are going to keep this really short and quick. So we've got 5 speakers, and each of us is going to speak for about 7 minutes. In fact, I'm going to use a timer to make sure that we speak for about 7 minutes. And when we get close to our time, I'll wave a 1 for 1 minute left. So I won't say a lot about myself, and I won't spend a lot of time introducing the speakers, but we've got myself, Michael Flood, Alice Elwell, Marilyn Campbell, Lisa Van Lint and Naomi Barnes, remarkably in the order in which they will speak. So that's very handy. And so look, I'm going to start, and I'm just going to go straight into it by sort of setting the scene. So I'll start my little timer. So Andrew Tate. Who is Andrew Tate? He's a prominent media influencer. He's also a former professional kickboxer. He's a former Big Brother contestant, and he's a big deal, or at least was a big deal, on social media. So for example, his videos featuring his opinions on TikTok accumulated 11.4 billion views. He had 4.6 million followers on Instagram and so on. This is before he was kicked off many of these platforms. And Tate is widely known and seen positively, particularly by young men. Some people call him Trump for teenagers, particularly teenage boys. But perhaps a key thing to know about Tate is that he is a preacher for the patriarchy. He's known for his highly misogynist or women-hating and sexist commentary. He argues that men are the protectors, the providers, the patriarchs, while women are their subservient caretakers, or at least should be. He says that men are now the victims, in fact. Women have taken over, men are now the victims. The world, the matrix, is enslaving us poor men. So he's a preacher for the patriarchy, but he's also a practitioner of the patriarchy. He's alleged, at least, to have perpetrated a series of sexual assaults himself against women and is currently under investigation for human trafficking and rape. He ran a private online academy, Hustlers University, that was in effect a pyramid scheme. He also ran a pornographic webcam business, allegedly based on tricking or coercing women into participating in the production of pornography. And so it was that, the human trafficking and the sexual assaults, that has earned his investigation, and is currently under house arrest for these. And Tate is not the only one of these kinds of sexist or male supremacist influences. He's in fact one example of a new wave of explicitly sexist and anti-feminist social influences. And this new breed of influencer seem to despise women. They portray women as lying bitches out to ruin men's lives, or as stupid, simple beings enticed only by six-packs and wads of cash. And Tate and others can be seen as overlapping with or as part of the Manosphere. The Manosphere is the online ecosystem of anti-women websites, defined by a deep-seated resentment of women and a profound hostility to feminism. So why are influencers like Tate popular? Why do they have traction? One reason is they tap into, in fact, very old ideas, very old, long-standing sexist norms and ideals, into kind of age-old ideals, age-old images of women as only sexual objects, as lying and malicious, as symbols of male status. And those kinds of norms are much more common among young men than young women. And that's true also in Australia. So recent Australian research finds that significant minorities of young men, anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3, agree that men now face disadvantages compared to women, that men are being discriminated against, that men are now the victims, and so on. That's one reason they're influential. Another reason that Tate and colleagues are influential is they tap into some boys and men's sense of aggrieved entitlement, the sense that they're now missing out on privileges or entitlements that they have a right to, the sense among some boys and men that they feel marginalised or redundant. Tate and colleagues sell a traditional image of masculinity, a kind of alpha male. He's confident, he's in control, he's got girls, sex, and money. Tate and colleagues also exploit anxieties and insecurities that we can see among some boys and men. And people like Tate do offer a vision of self-improvement, a vision of making yourself better in some way. But the vision of self-improvement they offer is highly individualistic, it's shallow, it lacks empathy, generosity, or vulnerability. Tate also is popular because he makes very good use of social media strategies. And finally, Tate and colleagues are enabled by some social and economic shifts that mean that some men struggle to achieve traditional markers of masculinity, like a career for life, marriage, a house, and so on. So what are the impacts of his teaching? I'm just going to see how I'm going for time. Lovely, I've got 2 minutes 40. Impacts of his teaching. So one is his kind of normalising of sexism, his normalising of misogyny harms girls and women, of course. Tate and others actively advise men and boys to treat women badly. And they produce young men who believe that men's emotional and sexual needs come first, and that women's most important role is to serve men. But the ideal of manhood that Tate preaches also harms boys and men themselves. It teaches boys, or tries to teach boys, a kind of selfish materialism and control, whereas boys need to develop skills instead in emotional intelligence to thrive in relationships, to thrive at work. Certainly some boys and young men are confused, frustrated, and lonely, but rather than encouraging them to develop their kind of interpersonal skills that might ease those, Tate teaches boys and men to double down on tired cliches and cartoonish images of manly strength and success. And so at a time when growing numbers of girls and women expect equal treatment, expect respect, this is a recipe for conflict, a recipe for sexual violence. So what can we do about it? More of the speakers than I will talk about this, but I'm going to very briefly, in a minute and a half, talk about some things we can do. And there's 3 kinds of strategies I'll briefly mention to reduce and prevent the influence of people such as Tate. There's primary prevention strategies that try to make the initial development of sexist attitudes and behaviours less likely. And one obvious strategy here is education in schools. Education in schools to present positive narratives and to challenge sexist narratives. So, for example, schools have an obvious role in including curricula on healthy masculinities in healthy or respectful relationships education. And in other publications, in other blog pieces and so on, I've written about how to promote healthy masculinities in schools. Schools can also use media literacy strategies to inoculate, to kind of vaccinate boys and men against sexist content and empower them to respond more critically. We need social norm strategies to promote gender equitable norms, having community standards on online platforms, using campaigns to encourage people to recognise and speak out against sexist ideologies. We also need secondary strategies aimed at those at risk of being recruited by Tate and colleagues. So programs and counter narratives for boys and young men who may be spending time on Tate's platforms and elsewhere, and redirection strategies to redirect boys and men to more positive content. Let's see how much time I've got. It's stopped, which must mean I'm out of time. So look, there's a little taste of some strategies, but I will hand over now to Alice to tell us more.
Hi everyone, so I'm here to give the teacher's perspective on all of this, and I'd firstly like to acknowledge that what we're seeing isn't new, which Michael alluded to. Before Tate, we had people like Milo Yiannopoulos, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, and teachers have been putting up with this crap really for quite some time. But I think one of the key differences is that some of those previous characters have been held up as thought leaders, maybe, you know, they're just asking questions. But Tate does seem to be being put down in the media, which is a refreshing change. I'd also like to point out that misogyny operates within other systems of oppression. So anything we talk about today needs to be considered through other lenses like race, class, sexuality, etc. Tate and others are also linked to ethnic and racial stereotypes, which they use. And so if we're thinking about how to talk to young people, we also need to consider that talk isn't neutral, and the standpoint that you come from is going to affect your ability to or willingness to engage. So also in schools, if you're a contract teacher or a beginning teacher, it can be really challenging to speak about these things, particularly if you fear that you won't get support. Which brings me to my next point. Misogyny is taking place in schools, but it's often being framed as a behaviour management issue. Some female teachers and leaders might frame this as a rite of passage, something that female teachers, young female teachers, because a lot of the time it is younger female teachers who are being targeted as something that they just have to go through to earn their stripes. Whereas some male teachers or leaders might just think it's a bit of a boy thing, or they might give some helpful advice like, oh, the boys always behave for me. I'm not sure what the problem is. And if we want to move beyond the gender binary there a little bit, lots of the time schools and teachers will frame the issue as a problem located within the teacher. So a problem of a lack of control or a lack of behaviour management. Let's just do some skills, we can upskill them. But that kind of institutional gaslighting is so demoralising. A lot of the time, the students who are, targeting teachers with this kind of stuff, they're saying it's all in your head, miss, it's just a joke, can you take a joke? And then when you go to a leader and say, this is happening in my class, and they say, oh, it's just a behaviour management issue, it makes you feel not very good. And so until we actually acknowledge what it is, which is targeted misogyny, we're going to find it hard to make any progress. And when we look at what's actually happening in schools, so teachers who are being harassed, sexually harassed, ganged up in public spaces, boys taunting them openly in the classroom or trying to goad them into arguments, we can see that this problem is deep, without any easy fixes, mostly because it's not actually acknowledged in schools. I'd really like to encourage everyone to follow the research that Dr. Stephanie Westcott and Professor Stephen Roberts are doing in this area, because it's so sorely needed. We've been crying out for this for a long time. So what can we actually do? Well, it isn't an individual problem to solve because it's not an individual problem. First and foremost, schools please implement respectful relationships curricula in a way that it was actually intended to be put out. So not just, one-off lessons here and there. But if we do want to think about how we're going to tackle it, maybe on a more individual basis, the first thing I'd say is that I would encourage teachers not to treat it like a behaviour management issue and shut it down or fight back, because doing so just validates what these students often think, that female teachers are the enemy, they're oppressors, unwilling to take a joke or have a debate with facts. And just honestly, you can't win. You're not going to change any minds through debate, because the attachments that these boys have to Tate are so much more emotional and non-rational. So this is what I'd say we would do, apart from all the big things that we need to do. Feminist pedagogies. This is something that I've written about previously, but using feminist pedagogies, they focus on reframing power relations in the classroom to amplify student voice, challenge the patriarchy, and view the classroom as a site of activism. Because students and teachers can only have a partial understanding of each other's lived experiences and subject positions as raced and gendered and classed individuals, the best we can do is to show that although we can never truly know each other, we can try and work together to reshape the classroom. We also need to think about how we're using voice in the classroom. So having discussions are really important, but silencing certain viewpoints might be antithetical to robust democratic dialogue, but it also might be allowing oppressive dialogue to reign unchecked, and that can contribute to the very discourse that feminist pedagogies are trying to deconstruct. So a dialogic approach, which I know Naomi will talk about later, based on questioning with flattened hierarchies is the way to go. How do you do that? Well, you need a truly student-centered approach. So how are you involving students in all areas of your classroom? And look, I know this is hard if we're talking about like a year 9 class that you have on a Thursday afternoon, but are you involving them in your planning? Are you letting them have a say in what you're doing? And even saying letting them have a say feels problematic to me. But I think if we want to actually do something about this, we have to step away from this idea as the teacher, as the sage on the stage. And if you make it a truly student-centered approach, you will find that it won't be you fighting back, it will be the students, which is so much more effective. If you have someone in the classroom saying the things that Tate says and you try and shut it down, you're validating what those students think. But if it comes from everyone else in the classroom who are using the skills that you've taught them through great dialogue and good questioning, that's so much more effective. And that's actually the world that we really want. We don't want them just repeating what we say. We want them thinking critically about what they want in their classroom. And finally, I'd say pay attention to the emotional responses. These are not rational responses, they are emotional responses. I once had a student write an essay on how feminism was to blame for the male suicide rate. And although we did have a bit of a chat about correlation and causation, at the heart of it was just a disenfranchised boy who was really seeking power and couldn't find it. We spoke about his feelings. We spoke about how he came to these ideas. And I didn't just say your facts are wrong, because that wasn't going to, change his mind on anything. What I did was focused on relationships and trying to find a way to make him feel less disenfranchised. Did I change his mind? But probably not. I don't think that's my job, though. I don't think that's what we're here to do. Instead, we need to try and find ways to actually give students the opportunity to speak about how they are feeling, what they are doing, and to bring the rest of the students in. And I've got 1 second left. That's it from me. Stay safe, forge relationships, and encourage your school to take it seriously, because it is serious.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Campbell, and I'm a psychologist and a former teacher. And I think boys, and I've been asked to talk about bullying, I think boys actually get a bad rap when it comes to bullying. So when you think of a Google search and you want to illustrate your talk on bullying, you'll find a very large, menacing-looking boy. And then in literature, we start off with Tom Brown's School Days. And who's the bully there? Well, that's Flashman. And of course, J.K. Rowling took Flashman as her model for Harry Potter in making Draco Malfoy. So it's not only in stories that boys are shown to be the person who is doing the bullying. Usually in upper primary and lower secondary, we're kind of thinking about middle school, then what happens is that developmentally, we know that girls hang around with girls and boys hang around with boys. I mean, you know all about girls' germs and boys' germs, and you wouldn't want to go anywhere near them, would you? But what's happening in our increasing sexualized society is that boys are starting to actually bully girls in this middle type period. And why is that? Because people like Andrew Tate have actually given them that role model, and more importantly, given them the words to be able to bully girls. So I've been asked to say, is this bullying? So, quick lesson on bullying. Bullying's a subset of aggression. It's not fighting. It's got three main characteristics. One is the intention to hurt, can't be accidental. The second is that it's usually repetitive. And the third, of course, which is the most important one, is the imbalance of power. Now, a lot of people actually think this imbalance of power is because the person is stronger or there's more of them. But as Dan Olveus said, the imbalance of power is because in a fight you can say, okay, you win, I'm walking away. Whereas if you are being bullied, you are powerless because you cannot get it to stop. And then the third part is about harassment. And harassment is a subset of bullying on a protected class. So there's racial harassment, sexual harassment. So if we are going to say that this anecdotal of saying that the boys are actually now going to be bullying the girls, and is that sexual harassment? Yes, that's harassment, which is actually bullying, which is aggression. So how do we stop it? Really difficult problem, just as you said. Because we've had bullying for so long, and it's such a complex social relationship problem, and it's deeply embedded in our society. And I think that's what you were talking about as well. How can we, as one individual or one teacher, actually do something which is so, with a problem which is so deeply embedded in our society? And how can we change things? We can't give up, but it's bloody hard. So one of the things that we can do, I think, is for boys, is to give them some kind of choice. And you might think, well, of course they've got choices, like choices about how to be a man, and girls for choices about how to be a woman. So we know that developmentally you have this period of self-identity that's going on in this middle childhood period. And I think that the dominant culture so affects kids' identity, and I'm sure you'll be talking about this too, Lisa. Like even as an example, my own example, because it's the only person that I can remember or actually knew their cognitive workings. I was 12 years old and I was sitting in my classroom in an all-girls school. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to turn 13 next birthday. And I thought, I don't want to, because I'm going to turn into a teenager. And that's going to be terrible. I'm going to turn into a widgie. Now, I'm sure that that's showing my age, but I thought that that would just happen. Like, because once you're a teenager, everybody hated you. And I thought I had no choice and I didn't know how to get out of it. In a little few months later in my thinking, I clearly remember thinking, you know, I'm in this first year of high school and I'm not fitting in here. I'm loud, I'm boisterous, I know the other kids like me, but the teachers, I'm getting into trouble all the time. What can I do? How can I be a girl? I don't think I'm very good at being a girl. And I thought, oh, I know, I'll be meek, I'll be quiet. Well, as you can see, it didn't last long, but it took me quite a few years to get over that. So I actually think that we need to talk about self-identity. I think we need to actually, as you have said, to have, not debates because it's not debatable, but we have to show those children, we have to talk about not what do you want to be when you grow up, but how do you want to be now? Are you happy with yourself now? And we have to have those kinds of discussions so that we can show that men need to be kind and respectful, but there are many, many ways to show your masculinity while being kind and respectful. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Van Lent, and my work is all in about genders and sexualities. So I'm here to say that we need to think more about masculinities and boys and girls and femininity. And I'm going to talk about Tate and that he makes remarks and brings attitudes that make us think in narrow and traditional ways about gender and sexuality, and that these remarks and this kind of thinking can reinforce harmful stereotypes, create binary views of gender, and it limits the possibilities for diverse gender expressions and sexual identities. So even from the words and the language that we've been using so far today, I feel like this is missing entirely from the conversation. So I just want to say, we know that humans identify with a range of genders that are beyond male and female, and a range of sexualities beyond heterosexual. This includes children and the young people that we work with and the children in our lives. Recent data by Higgins and Morgan in 2020, from here at QUT actually, suggests that young people in Australia identify with diverse genders and sexualities more than we've ever captured before. So they identified that 5% of young people are identifying as trans, 7% as gender diverse, and 48% identified as heterosexual. So we're talking about a large percentage of our population that is not fitting into norms around boy, girl, heterosexual. So I want to acknowledge, like Alice did, that we're not talking about gender and sexuality in isolation, and that, you know, these things are deeply entwined in race, class, ethnicity, ability, and so on. And Tate's views should be understood within the context of cultural histories which continue to favour certain gender norms and expressions and marginalise others. So by considering a broader social context, we can better understand how the power dynamics that Tate is trying to work with interact with the young people that he's trying to engage. So some of Tate's views impact on those individuals who may be more vulnerable to the harmful effects of his views, depending on their social positioning, thinking about, you know, who gets to be seen and who doesn't. And by critically examining how Tate is engaging in power, it helps us to critique and resist these oppressive norms, advocate for equity, work towards creating a more just and affirming society for all individuals, regardless of gender or sexuality. So these power dynamics can help us recognise how these or particular kinds of views reinforce these existing inequalities. So, for example, if Tate expresses views that align with traditional gender norms, such as asserting that men should perform specific kinds of masculinity, then it further marginalises individuals who do not fit into those norms and reinforces patriarchal structures, regardless of whether you identify as a boy or girl or something else, right? Now, Tate believes that if there is a variation from these traditional roles, that the world becomes disordered. However, his very traditional views or understandings of gender and sexuality fail to acknowledge that there is human diversity beyond these roles, and these ideas of gender that he's talking about are constructed. So it is possible to think beyond these cultural realities or norms so that people aren't forced into the kind of roles that he's talking about. So he is encouraging people into these traditional roles because he cannot see the world any differently, or he doesn't want the world to be different. He can only see the world working with these so-called traditional or understood roles. And his solution to this problem of Western cultural demise of man is to encourage everyone to have their role, know their place, and everything will work more smoothly. So the real problem is, though, that not everyone is happy with this construction of human life and order as he describes it. And those who believe in this order will try and use any kind of power to keep this order in place. And this is what he seems to be trying to do. He believes he's doing his duty to humankind by being a good man, a masculine man, a man who protects women. And he believes that this is the only way a man can and should be. Now, the world order that Tate dreams of, this world order he is trying to build, the only one in which he believes humans can exist, of course, is a world order in which he has all the power. So what can parents and teachers do? Well, I think there are a number of approaches that could include, sorry, that's my phone, my background. Sorry, my bad people. I think there are a number of approaches that can include addressing Tate and the things that he says and does directly, but there are many other strategies that we can do to build a resistance, if you like, to the Tates of the world. So critical literacy, teaching kids to identify when someone is imposing their view on them, trying to convince you of something. Teach them the persuasive devices, the appeal to emotion and affect. Tate uses these all the time. If you feel like you're not valued as a man, I will show you the way. I will teach you how to be rich and powerful. So he constantly contradicts himself. He stated in a TV interview once that he doesn't comment on things that he hasn't studied, but he comments about feminists a lot. And I'm going to suggest that maybe he needs to study feminism. His own logic fails, his own arguments. Look, beyond this, I think we need to be teaching people about who are safe people in their lives, what do healthy relationships look like, how to understand my own emotions and what to do with them. I think if you look at Tate and ask questions like, does he speak nicely? Right? Does he talk respectfully about other people? I mean, if you just ask those simple questions with the young people around us, we can start talking about healthy relationships, whether they're with people in their everyday lives that are real, that they interact with, or whether they're people that they don't even know, but they're interacting with online. So I think we can talk about things like respect and kindness as part of the things that we can do. And again, I also agree that this is a bigger issue. We can do things in schools very quickly, queering our curriculum, having safe spaces in schools for young people with diverse genders and sexualities, create spaces where they can contribute voice, ideas and perspectives, lead by example, involve broader school community, etc. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
We're going so well for time. You've got a little bit of time if you want to spend another 30 seconds.
That's okay. I think I hit the bolded points. We can ask more questions later. I'm sorry, I'm going to stop now.
Hi, so I'm a modern history, civics and citizenship education lecturer, but also I research in the space of online politics. So when I was sort of thinking about what to do for this speech, I was recently asked to speak about how would you teach Ben Roberts-Smith in class. And so what I did is I thought about that, and then I took out Ben Roberts-Smith and put in Andrew Tate, and this is what I'm going to say, okay, basically. So the first thing I want to say, and I want to make this absolutely perfectly clear, you are never going to be able to ban Andrew Tate. Absolutely will not be able to do it. They tried. He's been even more popular and more known around the world after Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook all banned him. Suddenly people began to wonder, who is this person that these massive, huge media organisations are banning? And his name got more clicks than ever before. Nearly every news outlet reported on the ban, bringing him into the sphere of older people who might not have ever heard of him before. I remember saying to my girlfriends, if your boys are talking about Andrew Tate, you need to have a chat. And they were like, I don't understand. And now they all know who he is. So if we're thinking in democratic terms, since 2016, we've seen underground extremist groups collectivise and radicalise and come to dominate political decision-making in the US and UK and even in Australia. Indeed, reactionary approaches to extremism more likely to send kids underground. So if we just ban him, they're more likely to be radicalised. Collectivised underground groups provide a sense of community that a lonely teenager who is trying to work out who they are more likely to align themselves with, and they are more likely to fight to keep that community. What we need is to be responsive but use well-worn democracy tools to help talk to kids and shift their thinking if they have been radicalised. So the following advice can be given about any influencer that you might find in the dark parts of the internet. All you have to remember is Pluto. I'm going to be a curriculum lecturer now. All you have to remember is Pluto. Yes, I do mean Pluto, the Roman god of the underworld, so I deliberately picked it because it's about the dark parts of the internet. And also poor dwarf planet. Yes, it is planet. Pluto is going to stand for partnerships, listening, understanding, talking with purpose, and being organised. Firstly, partnerships. When speaking to kids about someone like Andrew Tate, you need to be a partner in the conversation. Do not pretend you know more than the kids, because you absolutely do not know more than the kids about Andrew Tate. And they have been down every single rabbit hole, and Andrew Tate has given them all the language and all the comebacks. So don't enter this conversation thinking that you know more. No matter how much research you do, you're never going to know more than the kid that's already been radicalised. What you do need to know about is what it means to be part of a fair and just society, what the laws are about hate speech and defamation, and what it means to be an active and informed citizen. You can use these tools to speak with kids about whether misogyny progresses a good society or sends it backwards. I actually have had this conversation with my undergraduate students as well, because I have had that type of talk in my modern history classes. Listening. You must listen. Don't judge the words that come out of their mouths. Andrew Tate, as Marilyn says, has given them language that has not necessarily matched their development. So they might not know what words they're using, they might not be able to embody those words, but he's told them what to say. Ask them to think deeply about what the word means, how they're using it, and how it might make others feel. How that makes them look to others. Ask them to do some detective work. Ask them what evidence they have that person is the way, like that woman is the way they think that woman is. The words that they use to describe another person. Let them know that freedom of speech only applies if it's true, because that's one of his comebacks. Understanding. The goal is to achieve a collective understanding of what's going on in your classroom or family, for those of you here who are parents are interested as well. When a member of your family or your classroom has been radicalised by Andrew Tate in the Manosphere, talk about how it's affecting that dynamic. All of these conversations must happen with a trusted adult. You cannot bring in a gender and sexuality expert to talk on assembly. That is not a trusted. If anything, and this has been reported back to me, if anything, that's going to make it worse, and it will bring in parent complaints, because that person is not a trusted adult. The same thing goes for a package that somebody might sell you off the internet. They are going around. You must be a trusted adult that understands the process and has a dynamic within the family or within the classroom. Someone who's built a relationship of trust and can work in partnership. Talk with purpose. Too often conversations about misogyny happen on the fly. So you might be driving in the car, or it might be a reaction to something that's said in class. When speaking to kids who have been radicalised, these occasions are not the time to try and shift their thinking. When, where, and with whom the conversation occurs needs to be well planned, and it needs to have purpose, it needs to be designed, and it needs to be resourced with intention. Reactionary conversations are more likely to be won by the kid who's been radicalised. Be organised. You as a teacher or parent need to demonstrate rigorous decision-making processes. You educate yourself about what it means to live in a fair and just liberal democracy. The discipline area, and I believe that the discipline area, for those of you who are in schools who are listening, the discipline area best suited to this is my discipline area, which is the humanities, HASS, civics and citizenship in particular. Civics and citizenship is the often overlooked cousin of history and geography, but it has the tools already embedded in it to deal with misogynistic views in class. It teaches democracy. That's its whole point and how our democracy works. It also has rigorous structured inquiry embedded in it, that the teachers are trained in this within HASS. I mean, I know I train them. So remember, when somebody brings up Andrew Tate or wants to have a debate about Ben Roberts-Smith or any of these people from who are changing the way boys and men and masculinity is talked about in our society, think Pluto. Partnership, listening, understanding, talk with purpose and be organised. I can't do that one. And talk with purpose. Thank you.
We were incredibly good at keeping to time, which is lovely. And I forgot to say at the start, there will be afternoon tea. There will be afternoon tea at the end of this event at 3 o'clock. So we have the privilege now of 18 minutes, in fact, of time for question and answer. I feel like such a fascist timekeeper, sorry about that. And so I will chair this, but we'll take questions from the floor, and Bridget from the Centre for Justice will also let us know about questions that have come in online via Zoom. So questions or comments for anyone, for Naomi, Lisa, Marilyn, Alice or myself? Please. Oh, do we need to do microphone?
It would be better if the panel had a microphone. I'll just sit on the room, right?
So that can be the runner microphone and we'll use that one.
Try and talk loud if you can. Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, that's probably good. It'll be better quality if the microphone's on.
So one thing that I have encountered in having conversations like this with a 23-year-old son of mine is, but how do you explain how successful this man is? And that's what keeps coming back in our discussions, is he holds him up as someone that has achieved a lot, that is very wealthy and that is very successful. And that's kind of where the conversation starts to go downhill. But yeah, I suppose I want to get some advice on how to handle it.
My response would be, would you rather be a nice person and have kind, respectful people in your life, or would you rather be rich and famous? And I think, you know, they're deep core reflections of your own values that feed into those kinds of conversations.
He's not too successful at the moment, is he? He's incarcerated in Romania. Maybe you could say, well, he might have been rich and powerful, or says he's rich and powerful, but it doesn't look any good for him at the moment.
Other comments or questions?
I'll say absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Did you just make that up?
No. French Revolution.
Other comments or questions? Martin.
Thanks. I suppose there's two kind of questions here. One is any kind of, if you're going to get a more socially just world, some people have to give up privilege, whether that's men, white people, whether it's rich people, we have to have some kind of redistribution. So a redistribution of income for, you know, if we want to address poverty, if, for instance, we look at engineering faculties where, every year new 50 enrollments come in, 40 of those 50 are men. If we want to get more equality, some men will miss out. So at some stage, we have to raise the question, how do we get people to give up privilege? And how do we address that kind of broader question? But on the other hand, many of the young men who are attracted to this kind of discourse don't feel privileged. They in fact feel either voiceless or powerless. And so it seems to me we have to also address how do we deal with, and I think Alice raised it about intersectionality. How do we address issues around poverty? How do we address issues in schools where some kids, young people, don't feel they have a voice, that they are actually powerless within that structure, and so some of this feels attractive to them. So I guess it's a question statement, but it's about privilege and how we understand and work with privilege.
I'm happy to have a go at that. On the first one, good question, and that's undoubtedly true. And so part of the appeal is to people's sense of principle or values, or what you might call a reconstructed self-interest. So if you can appeal to people, in the way that Lisa did, in fact, what kind of life do you want, or appealing to people in terms of what's fair, or what's been unfair in the past, I think you can generate some traction. And certainly, throughout history, there have been white people who've taken up anti-racist struggles, heterosexual people who take up gay and lesbian civil rights struggles, and so on. It's certainly possible for members of privileged groups to act in committed and genuine ways as allies and to strive to challenge their own and other people's privilege. And such individuals and groups do so partly out of a sense of conviction and principle, partly out of a sense of kind of reconstructed self-interest, the ways that they themselves will benefit from lives that move towards gender equality or the end of, racial oppression and so on. But in relation to boys and men feeling powerless, that's absolutely true as well, that, significant numbers of boys and men feel like, it's a lie to say that they are privileged. And clearly there's some groups of boys and men who aren't privileged at all, actually, who are, Indigenous or trans and so on. And so I think, again, we have to speak to boys' pain and speak to men's pain, whether that's a pain of isolation, a pain of material disadvantage or other kinds of things, but offer different solutions from the ones that the Andrew Tates of the world offer. I think much more credible solutions, whether it's problems of depression and suicide or problems of unemployment or problems of separation and loneliness. I think feminist and other social justice approaches offer much more credible antidotes to those problems than the Andrew Tates and the Manosphere do. And so I think we can speak to pain, but offer different solutions to it. That would be my shorthand answer.
Just to the second part of your question about what do we do about this fact of people feeling that they were entitled to something that they no longer have, I think it's really about flattening hierarchies. If we see it as they had power, now they don't, they want to get it back, it just becomes this endless seesaw. So it's flattening those hierarchies, it's strengthening relationships, it's amplifying student voice, it's doing everything that we can to move away from the very power dynamics that we're trying to oppose. So I think, as Michael was just saying there, you need to do something where the people in the classroom or the home space or wherever it is, they need to feel as though they are a part of something, but we don't want them to feel as though they're a part of, something that involves misogyny, etc. So how can we make them feel like they have an active role in their classroom? Because they probably don't want to feel alone. They probably don't want to feel like outsiders. They probably want to feel included with the people in the group. So doing what you can in the classroom to make that space the type of space that they want to be a part of is just one thing that we can do.
Online question? Yeah, Bridget. Just unhook the microphone from the speakers.
Yeah, there's just two questions. There's two questions that I'm going to combine into one. The first is there a preferred gender for that person having that Pluto conversation? And the second question is, what advice would you give a young woman who's being targeted by that Andrew Tate type of approach?
You're going to need some kind of microphone. Yeah. It's going to take us off.
I'm just going to say the trusted person, and because every family and every school has a different trusted person, and that dynamic can change between each person. So I don't think there's a preferred gender. It's the one that usually gets the most out of, gets the best conversations going in their classes. I know that often, and one of the things which has been brought up in some research done by a colleague called Barry Shannon, who was at the University of Newcastle and is now at Adelaide. He was saying that sometimes we tend to put this conversation in health, but the most common place that this conversation comes up is in English or HASS, because it's where they write the essays, where we find out these things. It's where the teacher wants to have a dialogue because that's democracy, because that's what they teach, and that sort of thing. These types of things start coming up when you start bringing up theories like post-colonialism and those. That's what happened with me. I brought up post-colonialism, and all of a sudden I'm having a conversation about why can't white men write history anymore. So it's sort of like you have to have this type of. You have to be. The fact that they brought it up to me says to me, I'm the trusted person. Because I don't think that they're not going to bring it up. They're not going to bring it up to me if I'm not the trusted person. because they're a lot of the time they're afraid to say that out loud, if that makes sense. So I would say that there isn't a gender. I can't remember what the other one was. Oh, if it's about what if it happens to your girl.
Yeah, for a young woman experiencing this kind of thing.
I'm not the person
what
to
would be
answer
your
that because I
advice?
lost my mind when it happened to my girl.
I think it's what you do with any person who has been victimised. And that is, I've just finished a research study that actually asked young people if they had been victimised, and they told somebody, because that's the prevailing advice, is to tell a trusted adult. What did they actually want the adult to do? Because we haven't asked kids that. We've just assumed. And for teachers, if a young woman comes to them and says that they've been victimised, they will often go into an interrogation. Is this bullying? Were you fighting? What happened? Who did so? Because if you look at it as a disciplinary matter, then that's what teachers do. I would rather say to the person, the actual student said, what you should be doing is that I want some kind of emotional comfort. I want to be listened to. I don't want to be questioned. I want to have a conversation and not an interrogation. And then I would always ask them, and how do you want me to help you? Now, a lot of people say, but they're kids, they're students, they won't know. I think they do, otherwise they wouldn't have told you. So I will do, and I know this opens a can of worms for teachers who then say, but they were abused, therefore I must report, etc. I won't go into that at the moment, but I think, yes, listening and then ask, how would you like me to help you?
Stephen, I'm going to pick on you. So Stephen Burrell is a researcher from Durham University in the UK who's visiting Australia just for a little while. And my understanding is that Andrew Tate and the kind of impact of Andrew Tate is very visible in the UK, perhaps more so than Australia. Can you comment on how schools and others are responding to these issues in the UK? Sorry to put you on the spot like this, Stephen.
Thank you. No, I wanted to ask a question myself, actually, so that's fine. Yeah, because I was going to say, like, he has been getting a huge amount of attention in the UK from the media. Yeah, and I think it's been causing a lot of concern among parents and teachers, as seems to be the case here as well, and a lot of people not knowing how to deal with it. I suppose my feeling is like, he is just the latest, and particularly, obviously, he has a particular presence and influence, which is really scary when you look at the social media platforms and stuff that he's on. But he is just the latest iteration of misogyny, isn't he, really, online or in school spaces. So I suppose one thing which has concerned me a little bit is all this media focus, and is there even a risk with us? You know, when we talk about him, are we giving him more oxygen, more of a platform? So I suppose, yeah, my question was, how do we avoid doing that, I guess, in the process of tackling him and his beliefs? Because also I get the impression maybe with some boys, he kind of, because they know that all these adults don't like him, that can give him more of a kind of this rebellious kind of appeal, right? That even if boys don't necessarily always believe in the things he says, like, he can still, I suppose, espousing those views, you know, they can get a rise out of adults by saying those things. So yeah, do you have any thoughts on how to avoid those things, I guess?
Yeah, I think it alludes to some of the things that I was talking about before around, you know, I guess building a resistance that doesn't necessarily address Tate or the Tates of the world, you know, directly. And it feeds into many of the things that all of us have said around having, you know, positive relationships, having, you know, people in your life that you can talk to, whether it's a teacher or, you know, a family member or etc., you know, etc. in your lives. It's leading by example, you know, teaching kids about how to recognize their own feelings and decide what they're going to do, you know, with them. Think about what kind of people they want to be. It's all the citizenship stuff and the democracy and creating safe spaces for, you know, voices that don't necessarily get heard in these debates. Or yeah, I think it's not there's no single silver bullet. I think all of us have a place to, you know, behave in these kinds of ways, raise these things to talk about out in the open without necessarily having the Tate debate, you know, and getting into those, you know, direct arguments that you were talking about. I'm interested what others think, yeah.
Hold the microphone separate from the other bit. That's it. Thank you.
So to come back to your, are we amplifying his voice as well? I think by as I said, banning him actually amplified his voice. But also, I think it's very, very problem. And when I was thinking about this, because originally we spoke about, I'll talk about freedom of speech and, you know, all that researchy type stuff. But when it comes to the crunch, it's not like we can sit here and say, oh, we shouldn't amplify him, but that's a very classist academic thing to say, because the reality is teachers, as Stephanie Westcott and I can't remember, Steve Roberts are finding, it is a real problem in schools. The reason I brought this to Michael and Lisa's attention was because I have a number of girlfriends who are dealing with it. So no matter how much we don't try to amplify his voice and take that position as academics, the reality in the world is people want us to tell them what to do about it. And I think it's really valuable that we've said that this is not the first, it's not just about Andrew Tate, it's talking about these power dynamics that children are exploring in their middle years of school. And Andrew Tate is the figurehead of the moment to talk about that.
But just to pick up on your dynamic, Stephen, one thing we could do is have a whole bunch of kind of boomer age, very unfashionable men and women declare their public support for Andrew Tate and Photoshop them with their arms around them and, you know, Andrew Tate is so cool, that kind of thing to diminish his cachet.
That was Donald Trump.
So that was Trump, yeah. Well, he's the young Trump, apparently. Yes, possibly so. Other questions or comments? We've just got a couple of minutes left, or one online. Definitely can't read those, but can someone read them?
If we do an express answer, what about the girls and women who buy into Tate and the return to concepts such as trad wife as part of the backlash against gender diversity and progress? How can you talk to girls who feel that feminism has failed them? In 2 minutes.
Who's taking that?
That's a doozy. How can you talk to girls who feel that well, I mean, think in the same way that you would talk to boys about these sorts of things. If they think feminism has failed them, it's because perhaps they're looking at it from just one perspective, or they're thinking about it from an emotional perspective, or they're thinking about it from an individual perspective, as opposed to, well, who has gained from feminism? Is it different groups and you might not be a part of that? I think in all cases it does come down to an emotional thing as well. So has feminism failed you, or are you feeling failed in different ways, essentially? It's not, I think like Lisa said, there's no silver bullet. It's not an easy way to go about it. It's something that will take a lot of time, a lot of talking, and just being open to it, essentially. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have niece and nephews who were teenagers a couple of years ago, and I sent them both, one identifies as male, the other is female. I sent them books about feminism for them to learn about power and feminism, because, you know, I think young people actually don't necessarily understand what feminism is, what's happened in the past, what it actually means for us. So if they feel like feminism has failed them, I would encourage them to study it and get into the streets and protest, because it's unacceptable. You know, there needs to be collective movement.
I would also,
individuals can't deal with it.
sorry, I'd also add that their feminism might not be our feminism as well. So like you say, like there's been different, the way that lots of young people view feminism is really different, and in a lot of ways a lot more progressive as well. So making sure that they're really looking into different perspectives.
And I just want to quickly problematise it and say, well, maybe feminism has failed them because all we ever teach them is white liberal feminism.
We're at 3 o'clock, and there's 2 more questions which let's not address, and there may be further questions in the room, but I think a good time to wrap up. So I wanted to finish by saying there is afternoon tea, but also we've put together a few resources that may be of interest to people in the room or people on the Zoom call. So a couple of people have written up their talks as short blog pieces. They go up tomorrow, is that right? Thursday. And so we will circulate to everyone who's participated in this or expressed interest in participating in this, a list of those pieces and other resources that we think may be relevant to you. So there will be some follow-up from this event. So thank you for coming along today. Do join us for afternoon tea and chatting and further discussion and so on. And if you can join me in thanking all the presenters as well.